Whenever I'm stuck in an airplane, one of the first questions, if you talk to the people around you, you go through the process of what do you do and whatever, and I tell them, and then that's the question they ask. For a long time, it was hard to explain it, but tragically, I have a really good example right now, which is basically remember all of the communication breakdowns leading up to the Shuttle Challenger disaster. We try to prevent that. And I've never found a person, at least who's an adult now, who doesn't understand that reference.
I think that a lot of people think that they're good communicators because they do it all the time. But that doesn't, just because you do something all the time doesn't mean that you're good at it. We have lots of really inefficient meetings. We fight with each other all the time. We're clearly not great at communicating just because we do it all the time. I've driven a car since I was 15 and a half and I got my driver's permit. Something goes wrong with the engine, I don't assume I can fix it. I go to someone who knows about the inner workings of engines. And so in the same way, when we study communication really deeply, we can anticipate problems sooner. We can come up with more creative ideas for how we might resolve the issues.
Young people today are surrounded with communication, specifically in their digital media. They are always sending and receiving messages constantly. And yet it is like a fish in the water. We sometimes take it for granted that we are expert in communication, but oftentimes we are the subject of communication. A lot of times those simple messages have very complex histories and very complex origins in institutions and laws and cultures. So oftentimes when we look at communication, we take something that is taken for granted and then look at what is behind it and also the complex effects that it has. Propaganda, after all, always comes to you in the most familiar and mundane ways, but it is the product of long strategic thinking, often in nations or in corporations or in social movements.
Communication degree is a great fundamental degree. You learn argumentation skills, you learn public speaking skills, you learn how to organize people into groups, you learn how to create messages within specific contexts, so whether it's health comm or political comm. In my political communication class, I have students write campaign plans. They have to do opposition research. They have to do voting record research. They have to figure out how they're going to get people out to vote. They have to figure out how they're going to get money for the campaign. They write speeches for actual political figures. They've written speeches for their congressmen. He's delivered those speeches. Right, so they're research and analysis and communication-driven projects that translate into real-world jobs.
I had students that would then become part of public health campaigns, work in healthcare organizations, either in terms of patient education or patient care or patient outreach, or in terms of working with human resources within healthcare organizations. And then, of course, there are a number of professional options that students may have if they want to go to law school or graduate school or something like that. The main thing about health communication, even if they don't go into health, they don't necessarily have to or necessarily want to, is the main thing is when you're interviewing for a job and what's going to distinguish you from other people. And that is, you can say, I can do X, and let me give you an example. Those examples are going to be the things that will set them apart. And so health should be one of those that even if it's not a health job, they might have an example there that they can use to demonstrate a skill that they're trying to talk to an employer about.
I think communication is not only a very popular major these days, but it's also a very relevant one to society. We are in a media-saturated world, and a lot of the issues that need to be solved in society are communicative issues. And if we learn how to interact, let's say, in intergroup situations and communicate effectively in them, that would be really something that's valuable for all of us to know about. I think there's journalism, especially international journalism. There are some of my students who've gone on to start their own organization and NGOs that are committed to social justice issues. Some of them have worked with government sectors with policy making that relate to media. Some have gone into the health and media industries. So there are a lot of options here, globally, nationally, and locally.
Graduates in political communication can do all sorts of things. They can work for political candidates, they can write speeches, they can develop messages, they can work with social media. There's a range of opportunities available, and these skills are highly sought by candidates, and especially as we've entered a digital world, they're really focusing on sort of new technologies and new ways of communicating. But the one story that I really like is a story about a student who took the skills from political communication and applied them somewhere else. He opened a barbecue restaurant, and he said, I took the same sort of approach that you used in terms of defining how to develop messages and thinking about opening the restaurant. His restaurant, City Pork, has been wildly successful, and it does a great job.
When my students and I talk about their futures as health communicators and the health communication professions, we talk about ways in which they can use the skills that they're learning in class about their knowledge, their newfound knowledge about health, to engage in health education jobs, PR and marketing jobs. A lot of my former students do blog work for healthcare organizations, and we really talk about how what they're learning in health comm classes can apply to these kinds of jobs. Several of my students that I've had in my health comm classes have gotten really good jobs in health communication. One works for a pediatric emergency room as their social networking PR person. She does blogs, she does their social networking, their social media posts, and she talks to me all the time about how all the stuff that she learned in my class has been really relevant. I also have I have several students that are in master's programs, but one that did an internship for a mobile emergency room that has been really interesting, that she talks to me about in terms of the stuff that she learned in health and family and how she's been using that to help people provide social support to their loved ones through what is a really stressful time.
When you study media, especially in the communications department, you learn how messages are constructed and how they're passed along to audiences. And the great thing that's happening today for researchers is that these audiences get to be infinitely smaller and smaller and more diverse. It's hard to say now what mass media is and what individual communication is. They are overlapping. I think some categories of jobs that used to be there are gone now, simply because technology has overstripped them. I think that when we say communication and job, it's not the same thing as saying journalism and jobs. That with a communication degree, you really are properly qualified to take entry-level jobs in both social media, and every company in America today has a social media expert, or routine media or legacy media like a newspaper or a radio station.
So one skill that I think students often leave with is just understanding that there's certain biases at place, and we all come with certain beliefs and experiences that really shape the way we perceive even the most rational and straightforward information. And I think understanding that really carries over into other areas as well, and having them understand that maybe my experience is very unique to me and there's reasons for that. I believe that communication really stands at the center of everything, and a lot of my previous students are now in the fields of advertising or political communication, PR, etc. And what they continue to tell me is that they really benefit from this idea of strategic communication, and that we really need to go into the planning of communication with an idea of our goals, our target audience, and the ultimate objectives we're trying to reach. And unfortunately, I think that is still very much underestimated, how important that really is in almost any job these days. So I think students greatly benefit from communication degrees.